Good evening, everyone. I see people joining in. Hello, hello, hello. We'll just give it a few minutes for people to join. So we'll probably start at about 8:03, 8:02, 8:03. But good evening, everybody. Hello, everyone who is joining. Thank you so much for joining us. We're just giving folks a moment to log in, and we'll get started in just a couple minutes. Hi, Samantha. Good evening. And yeah, everyone, the chat is open, so feel free to chat throughout the evening. There's a lot of dialogue going on in the chat, almost as much as what's going on the screen. So definitely chat with one another in the chat, and we will get started in just a moment. There's also a Q&A feature as well. I'll go over all of this at the top of it, but feel free to use the chat and the Q&A. Hi, Kimberly. Hi, Jennifer. All right, we'll give it just one more minute. Amy, we're happy you're here too. Thank you so much for joining us. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So good evening, everyone. My name is Deona Kalala, and I am the chair of the community committee within the NODCC. And we are so excited to bring to you tonight this month's webinar, Connect to Reflect series webinar, Teaching Kids with DCC, What Educators Need to Know. So this panel is really intended to help our educators learn how to work with kids with DCC. So in this chat, we'll provide a lot of helpful background about the NODCC, about DCC as a disorder, along with tips for special education accommodations that we at the NODCC recommend as well. So it's going to be chock full of information, and I just want to rush into introducing this panel because you've got a phenomenal group of ladies here tonight. These are the women that have lived so much of the DCC experience, but even more so than that, they give back tremendously to the DCC community. And so I really just feel honored to be on the panel with each and every one of them, and you guys are in for a treat tonight. So I will give a quick introduction so that we can get into the content. We have Barb Fonseca, who's here. She is the managing director of the NODCC, and she's also mother to a lovely son who is, well, I'm going to use the term low functioning just for lack of a better term, but it's going to help everyone orient into, the comments that people are sharing about their DCC child. So she's the parent of a low functioning DCC adult. We also have Kim Oren here today, and she is an educator and administrator. And that's really underselling all that she has accomplished, but to keep it brief, we'll leave it at that. And she often gives a panel presentation at the NODCC about IEP meetings and 504s. And if you come to the meeting, you definitely want to participate. And she is the parent of a high functioning DCC adult. And then we have Kathe G, who, if you haven't checked out our YouTube page, check out our YouTube page. She is an adult with DCC herself. She's also an educator working in the schools, and she is a mom to a high functioning DCC child. So she knows DCC very well and also has an intimate knowledge of educating a DCC child as well. So we're happy to have her here. And last but certainly not least, we have Heather Will, who is a homeschool mom. So she's both a parent and a teacher. And she also, if any of you have not heard yet of the babies, DCC baby support group, she runs those support groups. So again, these women are always all giving back so much to the DCC community. And she is mom to a high functioning DCC son. So welcome, ladies, to the panel. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us this evening. And we're just going to hop right into the content so that, we can get things going. So to kick things off, Barb, can you just provide an overview of NODCC and the DCC diagnosis?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, so the NODCC was formed in 2002 by a group of parents and professionals that wanted to help and our families out and provide education on the disorder. For those of you that are maybe a teacher joining us for this call, I'd like to describe the corpus callosum a little bit to you. So in very easy, simple terms, the corpus callosum is the largest band of nerves in your entire body, and it joins your two brain hemispheres together. So we cater to individuals that either have agenesis of the corpus callosum, meaning that they are missing their corpus callosum completely. Partial ACC means that some of those nerve fibers have grown, but they didn't go all the way, or maybe it started and stopped, as well as hypoplasia, which means the thinning of the corpus callosum, and also dysgenesis of the corpus callosum. So you could have your corpus callosum grow fully, but then it's distorted in many areas. And I like to say it's a little wonky, let's put it that way. So we are a very A to Z disorder. We have high functioning as well as low functioning individuals. And so the NODCC is here to aid and assist those families.
Thank you so much for that great background. And I want to just go straight to the meat of it too, Kim, also in terms of background. Can you provide just an overview of things that educators need to know about the typical special education accommodations that are provided to students with DCC?
Sure. So it's a challenging question.
Right, there's a lot.
It is in every kind of disability, it is always going to be individualized based on student need, student strengths. There are a lot of commonalities between the autism spectrum disorder. As Barb mentioned, it is a spectrum. You have a wide range of performing abilities, all the way from one end to the other and everything in between. And similar to what you hear in the autism community of if you've seen one with autism, you've seen one with autism. It's very similar with our DCC students. Everyone is very different. There are, I guess you could say, common accommodations that I've seen across this disability area in terms of reading. In particular, I see a lot of students with DCC struggle with comprehension in particular. And one very common accommodation might be to assist with that reading administration so that you're kind of offloading the processing abilities of having to read. The mechanics of reading is taken away so that the students can focus more on the higher level comprehension skill abilities. That's just one example. There are hundreds and thousands of accommodations, but just if we're talking about the brain and in this particular disorder, how that the lack of the corpus callosum or the defect of that impacts reading abilities because of that inability to really utilize and cross information quickly across the hemispheres. You see a lot of challenges in the areas of reading comprehension, a lot in terms of math problem solving, or perhaps there may be some students who are doing okay with that, but their processing speed might be a little bit lower. So you may see a lot of students with this eligibility area of a learning disability might be something that it kind of presents itself in terms of our higher functioning students. They may need more processing time. They may need things read aloud, or they may need extra repetition opportunities. And there are tons of those that I could elaborate on. Most importantly, with our accommodations, it really should be data driven. It should be rooted in that neuropsych evaluation that very comprehensive evaluation that our evaluators compile that tries to determine what students' strengths and weaknesses are. And as long as we're looking at that data to give our foundation of where to pull our accommodations from, that's really what we should look at, because you will see, two DCC students side by side, and you're going to see very different profiles. And so that's really our starting point for identifying those accommodations. I hope that
And
kind of
then,
touched a little bit on it.
no, that's great. And I'm so glad you brought up the neuropsych eval as well, because that is a typical component of data that folks consider. And would you say that it's typical also to see students with DCC have an IEP or 504, or to do speech or occupational therapy or any other therapies?
So it depends, and I'll have to use my oldest son, who has complete ACC, as an example. We did not know about his disability until he was 12. So prior to that, he did not receive any type of services. Right before his diagnosis, he was beginning the testing for special education. So you can see students with 504, and the difference between 504 and special education services is really just you can have accommodations in both, but once you get into the special education side, you have more tailored, modified opportunities where you cannot necessarily modify under a 504 plan. You also have trained staff under a special education. So it really depends on the needs of the student. There can be students who go their entire all the way through high school and are on a 504, or some of them nothing at all. Some have had IEPs since early childhood. And also some of them kind of go in and out of phases. There may be times where there's a particularly challenging time in their schooling where it is needed, and other times where they may do okay and parents may decide to stop those services. So you see the full range, just like this broad spectrum, a huge range of combinations.
And so for the next part of the discussion, guys, what we'll do is talk about the questions that we wish educators knew, and the questions that address what we wish educators would do. So you've got a lot of experience on this call, and so we're going to deep dive into those two areas to tease that out. The chat is open. The Q&A is also open. So feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat. We will be reserving time at the end for your questions. But if some pop up in the middle and I can get to it, I will address it as we go along as well. So please feel free to use the chat and the Q&A. Kim, I want to stay with you a little bit because we've already alluded to the similarities between autism and DCC. And I know most educators and service providers are very, very familiar with autism and not so much with DCC. So can you talk a little bit? I know it's truly a one-of-one kind of situation, both for autism and DCC, but what you typically see as similarities and differences between kids with autism versus kids with DCC?
Sure. Autism is a spectrum disorder similar to DCC, and with that spectrum disorder tend to come similar, I guess, manifestations within the autism community, or the autism, I guess, how that is presented. You tend to see difficulties in the area, not only of academics, but also in social behavioral. And so you can have students with DCCs present very similarly. I'm going to go back to the example of my son. When he was diagnosed, his eligibility, his educational eligibility, was a learning disability. He presented in a way that was more parallel with a learning disability in the areas of comprehension and reading and listening comprehension. He did not necessarily present in the way that was aligned to autism. However, you do have a high prevalence of individuals with a disorder of the corpus callosum who do have challenges with behaviors and social skills. And that is where you see a lot of the overlap with autism. And just important to always remember that there is no educational eligibility for DCC. There is an educational disability, which is very different from a medical disability. And so when we're looking for an educational eligibility for special education, you really truly are looking for the the closest descriptor of their educational needs. So as I mentioned with my son, it was closer to the learning disability, but you do have a lot of students who present very similarly with those autism characteristics. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. I'll turn over to Kathe now. Can you talk a little bit about some of the common personality traits that you see with students with DCC, and maybe some that you even have observed in
Right.
yourself?
Yeah. I can definitely do that. I do want to also start out too, because I know that we're lucky enough that some of Lillian's soon-to-be future teachers are joining this call. And I know a few of the questions so far have been on special ed, but my path and my daughter's path are both regular ed. So it's a little different, but still with accommodations and needs from the teachers. But just to know that we're not all in the special ed classes. The personality traits, we have a lot. I can tell you right now that one of my big personality traits is that I am a big list maker because I don't like to get things wrong. So if you see me looking down, it's because I wrote all my answers down, even though I've had this disorder for 42 years and I should know all the answers. I wanted to touch on, I have 4 traits specifically that I think are the top ones, 3 of which I'm going to talk about, and then 1 kind of comes up in a question later. I think one of the biggest personality traits for a lot of DCCers is that we're very friendly people. We're big people pleasers. We're always happy, which is a great thing, but then it does have its negatives. For teachers to be aware of, it can cause the child to be very gullible, easily manipulated by peers. One interesting thing is a DCCer can be very quick to forgive because we're people pleasers. So something could go wrong where it could be okay for us to stay mad at someone, but a lot of DCCers don't realize that they can do that. And it's a lesson I've gone through with my daughter of like, okay, so-and-so wasn't very nice to you. You don't have to turn around and be like, here's a piece of my candy because I want us to be friends again. It's okay to still be mad at them. So sometimes quick to forgive is a little dangerous for us. And a lot of us are overly friendly, especially at the young age, middle school, elementary school. To a DCCer, everyone you meet is your friend. And even if they're just passing you by, my daughter's gone through the grocery store, waved to a little boy in another cart and said, "Can I have a play date with him?" I'm like, I have no clue who those people are. We're not doing a play date. So friendly is a big personality trait. We also struggle socially. We have difficulty with peers, which I think is a big thing with our personality. I tie social into just about everything that has to do with this disorder. During adolescence, DCC kids tend to be behind, so they're not as mature as their peers. So that can cause a lot of struggle because the personality hasn't caught up to where it should be. So that can cause a lot of strain and issues in situations. That also causes a lot of worry. That's part of our personality. Because we want to make everyone pleased with us, we're constantly worried about, oh, I left that conversation. Was that person happy with me? Are they still my friend? I'm not sure. And that is constantly whirling. And then even with socially, a big thing too, which I'm sure we'll touch on in many more questions here, is our slowness to process. which for our personality of wanting to be friendly and social and keep up and do what everybody else is doing. For example, if we're in a group, if we have a group project at school, we might not understand the assignment, or we might be taking longer to write out the answer to the question, and the rest of the group's going, hurry up, hurry up, hurry up, or they just leave us behind, and then we struggle. So social is a big, it covers a lot of areas of our personality. And there are other parts. Yeah.
Can I ask, because
Sorry.
there's a lot of folks talking in the chat saying that really resonates with them, the social issues and concerns. And so, and one even asked, like, how can we assist with someone who, you know, is perceived as gullible, right? So do you have any advice for, you know, dealing with these social kind of things that the educators could be doing?
I think for them, it's just a lot of being more aware that these situations can happen, and, you know, have that listening ear and know that maybe you need to not really step into the whole situation, but pull that student aside and be like, this is what's really going on in that situation. And just help make it like a teachable moment. Because there's not going to be like a quick fix. A lot of it is like a teach as it arises kind of thing. But I think it's a lot of that the parent and the teachers and the other staff need to be aware that, okay, this kid might be really gullible. So if I hear some kids in a group talking about something, just maybe check in with that student and be like, you know, what did you think was going on in that situation?
Yeah.
So like check-ins of just seeing where their thought process lies in the situation that happened.
Okay. And we've got some other,
and even with the struggle socially, there is I'll just mention them real quick. There is concrete and literal issues that this disorder has, but I will touch on those later. Well, the concrete I'll touch on later. The very literal I'll touch on now, and that's my last one. So I'm not going to try to take up too much time, Deona. I think a big thing with our personality, I've seen it a lot with the DCCers I've met, but I know for myself and my daughter, we are extremely literal. That is a massive part of our personality. We struggle with jokes. We struggle with sarcasm, very, very much so. We take everything very seriously. So if you're a teacher that likes to be sarcastic, and I happen to know that at least one of the 6th grade teachers that my daughter might have will be very sarcastic because my older daughter had him, she's not going to get it. She's going to think you're being totally serious. And oftentimes when we think you're being serious, we think you're mad at us for some reason. So it's a big thing to watch out for, that like, it's okay to joke a little bit here and there and maybe like tell us you're being sarcastic, but don't expect us to just know. I love that Barb is shaking her head. Yep. And yeah, we will take it very personally. And that's where the worry and the spiral of like being a people pleaser all ties in. And my daughter did tell me she wanted to give me an example. She said we have a lot of trouble with the irony part of sarcasm. And she gave me an example, and now I have to find where I wrote it. Oh, her example was, sorry, I wrote it down. Oh, sometimes my husband will say something like, I had a healthy lunch today of 7 Oreos, and I can't, even though I can tell myself at this age and this stage of my life that I know he's being sarcastic, I can't joke back and I can't just leave it. I have to say, well, that's not a healthy lunch at all, because I have to be extremely literal, and I often get the because like he just wants to be funny and I can't do it.
Yeah. Oh, that is such a rich example though.
Yeah. And it can kind of be dangerous. This is the last part I'll say about this. The sarcasm and us taking it literal can be dangerous if we don't know what you're saying is a joke or just not a serious thing. Example I have of that is when my daughter was younger. We were in the car and she was like, I want out of the car. We've been in here too long. I'm driving 65 down a highway. And I said to her, oh, sure, just go ahead and unbuckle and hop on out. Because I'm thinking, we're driving 65 down a highway. We're not getting out. And she goes, okay. And the next thing I know, my older daughter is saying, Mom, she's unbuckling. And I was like, okay.
Oh.
And I had to pull over and I was like, that was a joke. Do not ever unbuckle in the car when it is moving. Because she
Yeah.
thought, Mom said, okay, I can just get out. She didn't think about anything else. She took it very literal and rigid. So
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much for walking us through those personality types. And I'll say, I think you did a wonderful job of really explaining what's going on in the mind of someone with DCC. And that's something that,
thank
especially when you
you.
have young kids, you wonder what they're thinking, but you don't know, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So let me turn to Barb with that, because there are also behaviors, right? What we see as adults are the behaviors of students with DC. So can you talk a little bit about how these personality types show up as behaviors for our students?
Yeah, and I want to address a little bit of what Kathe said too. Often these individuals aren't very good. They're not good with social cues and they don't read facial expressions very well. And so they're not sure if you're mad or happy sometimes because they don't pick up on it all the time. Behaviors, and we hear a lot about behaviors. We get questions about it, weekly, that my child's having this behavior. And I think a lot of that is out of frustration. Because they're not getting it quick enough. They're not figuring it out fast enough. And I want to say our as Deona said, our son is lower functioning, and I learned early on, and I want teachers to really understand, and educators, that because their brain function is, they're trying to make those connections back and forth. So everything's at a delay, a large delay. And often for him, I would have to say things 2 to 3 times for him to finally grasp it and pause. And I think we live in a very fast world and we're moving really quick. And I know I am, like, I'm go, 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 go. And he is just not moving as quickly as I am. So I really, it looks like they're being lazy or they're not getting it, but they just really need the time. And it's a behavior that you probably see. And often in an IEP or 504, you can write in needs more time, or don't necessarily set the clock on them because you're going to freak them out, but you just have to give them a little bit more time. And of course, we see aggressive behavior, obviously, because of frustration, especially at school. We see it at home, and I think a lot of that really probably comes from that time. Like they need it said a different way. I'll give you an example. Like Nate, when he was little, I'd be like, get in the car, Nate. And he'd get in the car and I'd be like, put your seatbelt on. And he'd look at me and I would be like, you need to put your seatbelt on because we're going to leave. And he'd look at me and I'd finally say, all right, you're going to stay here or you put your seatbelt on. So I had to kind of rephrase it differently
Yeah.
a couple times. And in the classroom, you can do that also. You just have to phrase things differently, and maybe like a typical kid is just going to pick up on that right away, but they just might need either to be repeated again or said a different way. So I think Kim could probably attest to that too. So
Yeah.
as an educator.
Well,
teacher.
on that, let's go back to Kathe then, because you talked a little bit before about that abstract versus concrete thinking. So, can you talk a little bit about what that looks like, and how is it that things should be said to really resonate with a student with DCC? Oh, you're on mute, Kathe.
Sorry, that's from when I
That's
was taking
okay.
some sips of my drink earlier.
That's okay.
There are some challenges of the concrete versus abstract. Is that what you're looking for, Deanna, of like the challenges of it?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So with us, the concrete is like, everyday facts, literal information. For us with concrete, we love it because it means routine. It means exact directions that we can follow to a T. Sometimes that drives people crazy. I will tell you, when I was 19, I was actually let go from a job. This was before I was given my diagnosis, because the person I worked with told the employer I asked too many questions. But it was because he would tell me, do this, 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 and this. And I would do the first thing, and then I would say, okay, what was next? And he didn't like that I didn't remember his list of 20, but I needed to do that first thing, and I need to do it exactly the way you told me to do it, and then I can move on to the next thing. So with concrete, we don't like to veer into the realm of other things. We take things at face value. We like things that are very simple and easy to understand. With abstract, sorry, that's imagination. My daughter's answer to that is no. I tried to talk to her about it the other day. She was like, no. We don't like to do this. Some of us, I don't know, I think it's a fine line between we can't and we don't want to. We don't want to guess what someone's feeling, what their emotions are, what comes next, because we're going back to that concrete of just tell me the exact answer that you want me to say. And we have sorry, just looking at my notes here. The what next scenarios, we have a hard time with those. And so if I go back, I'm going to give a couple examples so people can understand a little bit of the difference. For the concrete, years ago, I had the wonderful opportunity to take some really unique tests for some researchers that have to do with this disorder. One of those tests is one that has to do with imagination. They handed me a card, and I remember it very clearly. It was a card that had a little boy laying in a bed, and his mother was kneeling down over the bed. And they said, we want you to take this picture and create a story, making this picture the middle. And you have to create a beginning, tell us what's happening on the picture, and create an end. I refused to do it at first. Because I can't do imagination. You want me to do imagination? If I play Barbies with the kids, I'm gonna pull something from real life and play that. This picture, they finally told me I had to do it. And I said, okay. There once was a little boy. He got really sick. His mom is sad because he's so sick. And then he died because I just wanted the story to end. And I mean, I was like, boom, boom, boom. There you go. There was zero imagination. No, it wasn't abstract at all. It was a very concrete, this, let's move on. Lillian, with the abstract, right now and this is a big thing I'm working on with her because I know abstract and imagination is an issue. We're reading a chapter book right now. She and I will read it together. And it's about this boy named Fort, and he learns magic and he's fighting dragons, right? She can read it. She can understand imagination if she's reading it and someone else is coming up with it. We get to the end of each chapter and they leave you with a cliffhanger each time. My goal with her when we read is, Lillian, what do you think is going to happen next? Right? I want her to come up with some outrageous, amazing, out there answer, right? So the end of the chapter could be like, and Fort walked up to the cave entrance, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, there's gonna be a dragon in there, all this crazy stuff's gonna happen. Her answer is, oh, he walks through the door.
Mm.
And that's it. She can't come up with any more. So it's a huge challenge of the concrete versus the abstract. And it goes into the schools because that's where I find, even right now, when she's asked to write essays on things of this is the story that happened. Why do you think this character is acting this way?
Mm.
She has the hardest time doing that. She doesn't like to come up with it. The other problem is in schools, there's a lot of think of the question, think of your answer, get that answer to come out of your mouth, write it down on paper. That's too many steps. She's gotten slightly better with things now that her teacher this year has I guess Google Docs has a voice to text option. So she can take that step out of writing it down because that takes her brain forever to get it from her brain to her pencil. So if she can just say it right out of her brain and it writes it on the computer screen for her, that has helped a great deal.
Oh, that is a wonderful tool. And, I think what you pointed out too about, kind of the brain just getting distracted is there's like this long list of things that you have to go to, makes me want to ask about sensory issues. So I'm going to turn to Heather now, because I know you've got experience with public school and homeschooling. Can you talk a little bit about how you see sensory issues show up for DCC students in the education setting?
Yes, absolutely. So, sensory issues, I mean, I feel like all teachers are pretty familiar with this. It's pretty common. But just anytime your body is overwhelmed with something. So, a lot of times for our DCCers, it's noise. I know the lunchroom was a big issue for my son when he was at public school. The noise and the chaos of the lunchroom, the lack of structure in the lunchroom, was very upsetting to him. He hated being in the lunchroom. And at his school, they only had a 1 day a week pull-out option where he could go have lunch with the social worker in a small group setting. So the rest of the days of the week were just so stressful for him. Gym also was another one where the noise and crowds were very, very overwhelming to him. And then there's other ways that sensory issues can impact, at least for my son, but I would assume a lot of DCCers are like this as well. It's what Kathe was talking about, too many directions. That is overwhelming. So that does actually become a sensory issue. They get anxiety about forgetting what the instructions are. There's frustration because there's kids who aren't following the instructions. And, our concrete thinkers, like Kathe mentioned, they are going to follow those instructions exactly like they are told. And when other people are not, that's very upsetting to them. But yes, and then concepts being presented too quickly is just overwhelming because of, at least for my son, he has a 3-second processing delay. So if you're giving a list of, here's what you have to do on your homework tonight, he's only on number 1 because it's 3 seconds before he's ready to hear number 2. So that's that, in the school setting. At home, we have a nice, well-controlled environment. We have crash pads. I have 3 kids, all 3 are noise sensitive. And so they know that about each other. They know how to be accommodating to their siblings for their sensory issues. Not always in the nicest way, are they? But, at least they know, like, if I scream, that's going to upset Timmy or Isaac or, my other son does not have a DCC, but has much more severe sensory issues than my DCCer. He has a lot of texture issues and things like that that can't really always be avoided, but we do our best. But yes, crash pads, fidgets. I know at school when Timmy would get very overwhelmed, taking breaks, he would take breaks with the physical therapist and do, they called it heavy work. So like high impact crashing into things, or they had like a weight ball that he would throw onto the ground. but she pulled him out about 2 times a day just to do heavy work and then go back into the classroom because he was regulated and ready to work.
Oh, wow.
So that was one of our accommodations when he was in a public school, to do that.
Oh, that is very helpful. And I hope I'm even taking notes here too. So I hope everybody is taking notes of those great strategies for dealing with some of that sensory overload that our kids can feel. And, I want to stay with you because you are unique on this panel because you are a homeschool mom. And so I know people do at times get frustrated with what's going on in the schools. And I think, everybody's always grass is greener, whether you're one way or the other, right? So can you just talk a little bit about, for those parents who are considering homeschooling, what they need to know to educate their students with DCC?
Yeah, actually, because even this year we started in a public school for 4th grade. That was our goal, was to break out of homeschooling and head back to public school this year. It did not work. We pulled him back home by Thanksgiving. It was just too overwhelming. Like I mentioned, the sensory issues. It was just too much for him. He could not do sensory issues and learn at the same time. So for homeschooling, it's a very low stress environment. We have a flexible schedule. And even though our routine is, I have alarms on Alexa that go off every 30 minutes to tell them what activity to move to. So that I have 3 kids, so that we're all rotating through our homeschool activities. And that it's concrete. Again, we don't like routine changes, right? So we're keeping the same routine. But we do have a flexible schedule where we can take days off when we need to take days off. Like if there's therapy or doctor's appointments, it's okay for us to take a day off. Sometimes we pack up a backpack and go have school at the zoo. So there's lots of fun things like that too. But also with homeschooling, the life skills are just as important as the education skills. My DCCer is 10. He does all of our laundry. I only fold. I don't wash, dry, nothing. He takes care of all of the laundry. He went through a phase where he would get up early in the morning and make coffee for everybody.
That's a nice
so
phase
it's like,
to go through.
it was wonderful. I could wake up to a hot pot of coffee every morning. I loved it. But there's a lot of things that they're learning that are life skills that aren't taught in the school and don't always have time to teach them at home after school, and sports and music and, all of these other activities that kids are in. So there's things like my kids all have a budget. They all know how to run a budget. They know how to earn money to put into their budget, how to save for things that they're looking for. We cook together. They each have their own fish tank that they have, raised the money to buy the fish tank. It's all their own budget that they used for it. Research the fish they want in their fish tank, so we can do really fun things like that. All my kids have their own garden in the yard. We do crafting stuff. There's just so much. And we finish this all by lunch because I have 3 kids. So our school day is done at lunch and they have all afternoon to play, which is fantastic, especially for those sensory issues. It gets the high impact in. We can go for bike rides, go on the swings, whatever we need to do. We can also work at their own pace. So, Timmy is in 4th grade math. We're doing 4th grade math, but we're doing 2nd grade spelling because math was more important for him at that point. He was rolling with the math. We set spelling aside. A lot of our DCCers can master something and then totally forget it when a new skill is taught to them. So, we go through all of that stuff too. Like, you had this, what you're doing here, but he doesn't, because his reading is advancing this week or his writing is advancing this week. And so math took a back burner this week in his brain. And that's okay when you're at homeschool because you can go at their own pace. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. And we did have like a one spot question. Someone asked, can you talk about what heavy work is?
Oh, yes.
For those that
heavy work is
the
any like high muscle work. So like stand at a wall and push on it, or run into something and crash into it. You're getting a lot of input on your body all at once. So like taking that medicine ball and throwing it on the ground. That is heavy work. You're lifting something that's heavy. You're moving something that's heavy. I think I've heard people try to push bean bags down a hallway, especially if it's carpeted. Anything where you have resistance to what you're doing and you're using your body's muscles to get that done.
Got it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about the things that we wish that educators knew about our DCC kiddos, and now we're going to focus on what we wish educators would do. So how can the parents and the educators, the service providers work hand in hand together? Um, I want to get just a show of hands from the panelists. Are you guys okay with going a little long? Because I think it'll be so great to record all of this, and to all of our attendees, we'll probably go a little long tonight. So if you need to drop off, don't worry, it will be recorded. But I just want to make sure that we get through all of this content, because what we've covered thus far, I think, has been really phenomenal information. So thank you again to all the panelists. So Barb, I'm coming to you. I want to hear from you about accommodations for low functioning DCC students. What do you think is appropriate? What do you think is helpful?
Yeah.
And
So
what
just
do you think that educators would do around that? Yeah.
Yeah, just so you know, our son is 25. So we have been through, Nate started in the schools district at 3. And a lot of that 3 to kindergarten time was really spent in therapy because he didn't walk till he was 3 years old. And so we had a ton of OTPT speech out of the classroom. But in the classroom, because it was preschool day, I mean, he led a fairly typical preschool day. And some of the goals that we wrote in there was like, oh, he'd play, like the kindergarten class was on the opposite side of campus, but he would walk to make it there. Then it was a bummer because he would get there and then recess would be over. So like we were saying earlier, like about the large, like throwing medicine balls, Nate liked to swing. So we would swing a lot. So we wrote some of that into our IEP, like he'll spend 10 minutes a day swinging kind of thing. Our education process obviously is very different than many. We really pulled a lot of the educational value out of Nate's IEP by the time he was in the second, third grade. I'd seen enough and knew enough that I really wanted to focus on the social vocational skills early, very early. So a lot of our IEP writing was like he would take the roll to the office every day and come back. So we worked a lot on social vocational. I didn't care that he could sort the color. I mean, I just gave a lot of it up at a certain point because it just wasn't important. And I want to say for educators, let's write realistic goals together. I mean, there were so many IEPs that we went into, and it was so depressing because it was like he didn't meet a single goal. I was like, can we write a real goal? Let's write a real goal that we know I know we're going to hit it, but let's write it so we like feel a little pumped in when we go up to that meeting. You're like, yeah, we hit it, right? So, are you guys losing? Uh-oh. So,
You're okay.
so like when we got into high school, I realized that they still had to do, English and reading and math that had to be written into his IEP. But by the time he was a sophomore, junior, I'm like, can we just write all elective goals? Like he did photography and ceramics. And I'm super grateful we were in a school district that they really, really accepted Nate. And just so everybody knows, he's nonverbal. He does not talk. But he's very facially expressive, so he's easy to understand. And he was in the Student Body Association. He was prom king. Like we really pushed for those social to get him out there as much as possible. And he loved it. And so I really want teachers to think outside the box, like maybe write a social goal, write a vocational goal. That's just my personal opinion. I don't know what Kim's an educator, so she can. I mean, I know that they're mandated to put so much into the IEP, but we really wanted to be really realistic. And as parents, we were really realistic about what Nate could or couldn't do. It wasn't mean that we didn't push him to write a goal that he was going to struggle with, because we definitely did struggle, but making smaller steps, not making huge, writing a huge goal. like, just so you guys know, one of the goals one year was like, he'll follow a 1-step direction. He'll follow a 2-step direction. He'll follow a 3-step direction. And by the end of the year, he could do a 4-step direction. Often we didn't even make it there, but we would write it again and we would keep like increasing it and reinforcing it. So.
And we had a one spot question real quick about what Nate does for work.
Nate doesn't work. Nathan is actually COVID, and Nathan aged out of the adult ed in our district right as COVID hit. We live in California, so we're very fortunate. We have lots of services, so that's terrific. And we are just now in the process of putting him into a day program. We have some really good day programs where we live, and so he'll go into that. We actually checked out Easter Seals this week too, into a work program. We're just trying to find the right fit for him. We travel a lot, and so it's hard to really put him into a 5-day program. And you guys, he's the most socially adapted child ever. I always like to say we kept him, not structured at all. We've kept him very loosey-goosey because we live a very loosey-goosey life. So I can pick up like in the morning, be like, we're going to go do this. And he won't be like, oh, but you said we're going to do that. I don't want to tell him like what we're doing, because then he wants to talk about it 24/7. That's where that obsessive compulsive, right? So he's not currently working. We're looking at some day programs. We keep him really busy. He's very active at our local Elks Lodge. So we've done a lot of the work too. I mean, we participate with him as much as possible and get him into as many activities as possible. Again, we're thinking outside the box in adulthood too. So.
Yeah. And so that I think was a really great explanation of accommodations that might be good for a child that's low functioning. Kathe, can you talk a little bit about the accommodations that you think would be appropriate and that you would like to see educators provide to students for high functioning DCC students?
Sure. Yeah. And when I do that, I did see, Deona, one of the questions in the chat asked about a good way to teach them how to have the ability to interpret figurative language. I don't know if any panelist wants to chime in. I don't exactly know what figurative language is, probably because I ignored all that stuff.
Figures of speech, that kind of thing. Like a figure of speech, like no, I can't think of one, but
okay.
It's a good figure of speech, you guys. So.
Maybe we can put it in a 504. I don't know. Goals on learning figurative speech.
It's raining cats and dogs. Thank you, chat.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Cats and dogs. It's raining down very hard, but figurative speech like that, metaphors, similes, idioms. Thank you, chat, coming through.
So I know then that Lillian did do a lot of that kind of stuff in 5th grade. I will tell you that I help her with her homework, and she and I struggled. And some nights we had to ask my child, Natalie, who is in 8th grade, who is all about words and writing and different things. Give us an example, explain this to us. It just has to be really broken down, because in our brain, we're going to at first take it really literal. And you say raining cats and dogs, we're going to picture actual cats and dogs raining down. But there is a part of us as high functioning that we know that that's not exactly right. But each figurative thing is going to need to be broken down to tell us exactly what it is. And that might be somehow added into the accommodations. I'm definitely going to look into that coming up for 6th grade. Lillian and I have done a lot this year in the last couple of years, focusing mostly on a 504. From my experience, I know that in a classroom setting, in a testing setting, noises are your enemy with DCC. We will get stuck on whatever that noise is. And even if we tell ourselves to ignore it, it's there in our brain. And I can tell you, even for these on here while I'm trying to listen to everyone else's, the panelists' answers. I can't answer people back in the chats because my brain can only concentrate on one completely, and it just doesn't. I can't do that. So we went through some of the 504 accommodations, one of which, because of the noises, was getting to have tests out of the classroom, out of the giant gymnasium where you're stuck with everybody, and into a room where you are by yourself. It can be fine-tuned depending on your DCCer. For me, I was moved multiple times. I had to keep speaking up. Luckily, I was a senior in high school by the time I was getting accommodations like this. But I had to keep speaking up because maybe they'd put me from a test in the gymnasium, they'd put me from the middle to the back right next to a fan. I'd say, well, now all I hear is the fan. I can't read this sentence. I know what the words are, but I'm not understanding it because the fan is taking over part of my brain space. And then they would move me into a room by myself. Well, there's a ticking clock on the wall, and I'd be in a room that has zero noises, zero distractions. Even my daughter Lillian, she would come home and tell me, okay, they put me in this room for this test. I got really distracted because this person has lots of things to look at. So there's that accommodation, but it would need to be finely tweaked, and it's something that the teacher needs to pay attention to, and maybe even ask the student about it. Did that room work out for you? If not, what was bothering you? What could we change? With us doing the 504, it's to keep Lillian in regular ed. We want the teachers to know that we have expectations. Our goal is for Lillian to keep up with her peers. And we want her to know that she can. So a lot of our goals, like one of them is that if she gets behind on classwork or notes, we don't want the teacher to give her part of it or say, oh, you got that little bit done. Okay, that's fine. No, her expectation is, and on the 504, is that she has permission to bring that work home. We've even done art class projects that she wanted to get in the art show that our teacher sent it home, and I went out and bought all the supplies you needed to finish it. She has permission to bring it home, finish it, and take it back in for its full proper credit. And my expectation from her is that she brings it home and finishes it that night and takes it in the next morning. With some DCCers, you want to push their brain to grow, to show them that they're capable of more. So with that kind of accommodation, Lillian thrives to not come home with homework. She's very proud of herself if she kept up with her peers. And that's just teaching her to move more quickly. We do extended time on tests. She's very slow. A lot of us are very slow. I try to be fast and I'm still really slow. But Lillian has no fast forward button. So sometimes a test that takes some kids half an hour will take her 2 hours. She'll still complete it to the best of her ability. But there's those kinds of accommodations that I think teachers need to take into consideration. And then different small things, the voice to text, that's a new one for us this year that we actually just had added because the teacher tried it out. It was beneficial to Lillian, and we said, hey, if we put it in the 504, we can use it on every paper. And Lillian has started to do more of her assignments where there's a lot of writing because she knows she can just voice it. Because previous to that, the teacher thought she was losing focus on doing papers, but it was that she knew that her brain couldn't do that part, so she would stop doing the assignment. And then it just sat as a 0 and being late. But once she realized she had this accommodation to help her, she's been doing the papers without me having to get after her. Let's see. And then I just had one thing I'm probably going to look for this year in 6th grade is, with each class being a different teacher, I think it would be beneficial for a child that's coming into middle school, if they're slow with processing and writing speeds, that asking the teachers if they are comfortable with giving her their notes, either to have her take them home and copy them and give them back to the teacher, or if the teacher can just print them and say, okay, you know, she's still expected to write as much notes as she can in class, but then at the end of it, here's the paper that has all of it, so that she has that information to be able to study for tests and things. So
Very, very helpful. Kim, I'm coming to you next. And I know I saw in the chat, you've got people from 5, 10, 20 minutes ago that you need to respond to, but because it is 9, and just in case anyone needs to drop off, I did see a couple of times the question of, what about our younger kiddos? So, you know, when we're in that 1 to 4, you know, pre-K kind of age, what kind of things, what are the tips, what are the tricks that you would suggest to educators who are working with kiddos in that age range?
are you asking me this?
Anyone on the panel.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Anybody, yeah.
I can say one quick little thing. For when Lillian was younger, we did a lot of to help her reading speed and her reading skills. When we turned the TV on, we would put we put the closed captions on the bottom. So then she's visually seeing the words, and then she's trying to keep up. We're at the point now where my whole family watches every single show and movie with captions on.
Okay.
So
That's awesome. Any other tips or tricks, recommendations for working with younger kiddos?
I know when Timmy was younger, he started in the public school system at 3, transferred right from early intervention in, and we had to include in his IEP that he always had to walk, even 3 through 5, he had to walk with an adult that was known at the school, because he was so trusting, and like Kathe mentioned earlier too, like people pleasing. He had 4 days a week of therapy or early intervention. He's used to adults coming into the house that he might not know that well, and he does whatever they tell him to do. And so when he goes into school, I was like, anybody who says, hey, you come with me, he's going to grab their hand and walk right out the door. So we definitely had something in his IEP about, like, make sure you know who he's with, like he's going to trust anybody who's around him. And then it's just other things that you kind of have to fight for sometimes, like the speech. He had echolalia, so he could speak everything perfectly clearly, but he would repeat back to you whatever the last thing you said was. So if you said, what's your favorite color, green or blue? He would say blue. If you rephrased it, what's your favorite color, blue or green? He would say green. So whatever the last thing you was. So we had a lot of speech accommodations in there, PT and OT accommodations. We really tried to focus on those therapies as much as we could when he was little.
Yeah. Any other thought, Barb or Kim?
Most of mine are secondary, so I'll hang out for the secondary questions. But Barb, I know there was a question about nonverbal. Any other kind of tips when they're in the younger years as well?
In the younger years for nonverbal, if I had known earlier, we didn't realize that Nathan would not speak until he was about 7. We received his another report back from his MRI that his cerebellum also did not fully fill in, and that's why he's nonverbal. I would have pushed for the augmentative devices earlier. He's a little older than now. I mean, now there's so many opportunities to have augmentative devices. We lived in a school district at that time that didn't approve anything that started with an I, so no iPhone, iPad. Now they do, of course, because technology has really caught up. But I really would have pushed that a lot earlier with him. Did work within a PEC system for many years. And Nathan, it's really hard to to explain him. Even though he doesn't talk, he's just such an easy read. And he's an excellent yes or no answerer. He's an excellent pointer. We had, even in high school, when we really were pushing his iPhone and using the app on it, the teacher was like, not that they didn't want to work on it, but the reality is he was getting his wants and needs met. So he really had found a lot of workarounds to get his wants and needs met, which is great, right? I wish he would work on his app more now because then we could have more in-depth conversations about things. He does. Anybody who's been on the phone with me or FaceTime with me, he loves to talk. So he wants to have ongoing communication constantly. But it's a lot of 20 questions. We play a lot of 20 questions. So, I mean, definitely I feel at school, he was always really easy. He never got into any trouble. But he kind of was pushed to the back because he was the good kid. We didn't have behavior issues. So I probably would have pushed that a little bit more, that he's kind of up in the front, that they paid a little bit more attention to him, but he was so easygoing. Like I said earlier, we just wrote things out of the box just to kind of, I mean, he learned to cut scissors in their days, and I'm like, who taught him to learn how to cut with a pair of scissors? It's like the worst thing ever happened to us, as he's like cut his hair like right here or something like that. But yeah, just good social cues. He doesn't understand like if your voice is raised or not raised. So like you'd yell at him and he just kind of laugh at you like, oh, you're funny, right? I'm like, I'm not being funny, I'm so mad right now. But teaching him some of those in school, it's hard because again, it's very education based, right? So IEP has to be written towards education, but a lot for us was just really kind of stepping out of the box. I know Amy had asked, and feel free, you can email me at info@nodcc.org and we can have a phone conversation and we can talk through it. I was just thinking, as we're getting together to put this call together, I really should sit down with his old IEPs. I have every single one for 20 years, and kind of go through and what were the goals that we were writing, and just kind of give some families some examples, especially those that have like those 3-year-olds and you're entering into the school district, and I mean, you're like a deer in headlights. You don't know what to write or what to ask for, or and just to kind of give some advice at what to ask for. And
Awesome. Yeah, everyone wants to see those IEP examples. So thank you for putting
I'm
that
sure.
out there.
And when we talk about the noise, like I'll tell you, every IEP was easily distracted. Every single IEP. Nathan is such a delightful child, but easily distracted. I mean, we tried voting, we tried everything, and it just never worked. He has very, very in tune hearing. So I'm like, yeah, I know. Testing,
Well,
he was a horrible tester. So every time they did a test, and a lot of that, like I suggest, if your child is being tested, I know that there's standards on how they do the test, but ask them to repeat. Can you just repeat it 1 or 2 more times? Or a lot for him, like especially when we did neuropsych testing, is he would just point at whatever. What's the first thing I can point at to then get to the next question to get it over with? But he knows it's not right. He's just going like this. He's not even looking. But to kind of repeat that and be like, are you sure? Just kind of go back.
Yeah, and I'll just add in things that I've heard, very generally is, the visual schedule is very helpful to help them orient themselves throughout the day, not just for testing, but repetition for all things. Repetition, 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 repetition. You got to make the novel abstract, or the abstract and the novel normal and standard so that it's stuck in their brain and they won't forget it, even if they lose it for a little while and it comes back, like Heather was saying. And I think DCC kids can be very visual and physical learners as well. So manipulatives are great. Anything that you can explain visually as opposed to just talking about it is very helpful. With respect to the social things, SEL, the social education learning, there's books and packets on there on that. And when they're young, that's a really great age to teach them how to interpret those facial expressions, those tricky social situations, how to make inferences about what's going on, so that even if they can't necessarily explain it, you know, they'll have it in their head that this is what is happening. And then Kathe also pointed out that songs are really great. You know, DCC kids have great memories. And so using that memory in song form, you know, anything that you can make fun, this is probably across the board for all kids, but especially for our kiddos that are doing a lot of therapies, anything that you can make fun is, you know, even better for the DCC kiddos.
We did all kinds of songs. Lillian learned our address and all the relatives' addresses because we changed Do You Know the Muffin Man to all our relatives' names and where they lived instead of Drury Lane.
Nice.
We learned the months of the year, and it's songs can be repetition, so it works out great. Yeah, that's a big one for when they're little.
Okay, Kim, I'm coming to you now. And honestly, I'll just give you the floor because I know you had a couple of things that you were going to address before I asked you questions. So I'm going to give you the floor and then I'll ask my follow-up question, if you will, on that.
Yeah, I wanted to address, there were two questions from Jennifer and Samantha in the chat, and they were specifically about the academic setting, high school, higher level concepts. And so I'd like to touch on that for a moment. And just a little bit of background information. My son is now 22, so he did finish public school. He graduated from high school with a diploma. We did have 1 year of homeschool when he was in second grade. And that was before I knew about his DCC. And I, over the years, really picked up on some patterns of his learning behaviors. One specifically was his acquisition of skills. It took so many repetitions for him to learn a new skill. And then what I noticed in the chat that I really wanted to speak on was an example that I want to give everyone is he would learn a skill. It would take a little more, repetitions than your neurotypical students. We would have another question that was similar. And in his mind, he couldn't generalize those skills that he had learned and transfer that information over. He would look at it as if it was brand new. And here I was, his mom, not understanding what was going on. I'm like, we just did 20 of these. You just had it memorized. You knew this. So there was a question in the chat about that, how is it that they're demonstrating that they know this and then it's gone. So one of the things that I've learned over the years, we did 3 different neuropsych evaluations, not just in the school setting, but we also paid to have it done privately. We wanted the comparison, and we learned a lot from those neuropsych evaluations. One of the things is that his short-term memory was great. He could recall, he can memorize, he could do poetry. It was all great. But long-term retrieval was where things broke down. That's why we started seeing with standardized testing, things were falling apart. He couldn't retrieve and pick that information together and combine it and analyze it and synthesize it. All of those higher level thinking skills he could not do because he couldn't retrieve that long-term information. Even though he had demonstrated that he had learned it, that he knew it, it was that kind of putting it all together and synthesizing where things started to break down. So we started, he was homeschooled second grade. We figured out his diagnosis when he was in 4th grade. The IEP started when he was in 5th grade. And then I had the pleasure of working with him while I was teaching at the middle school. So I really got to work with his general ed teachers and see him. He was still in the general ed class. He was not pulled out for special ed, anything. His special ed supports were pushed in the inclusion setting. So everything was kind of keeping up with the pace. I remember, though, we got to high school, freshman year, and he was very active on the swim team. And so he was part of a team. It was very motivating for him. And high school biology set in, and all the things I had been working on as a mom and a teacher. So here I was, special ed teacher, but I was also an English teacher in middle school. So I had taught both general ed and special ed. And I thought, man, I'm going to help him muscle through it. And biology, the amount of recall, the amount of synthesis and analysis was so much that I was spending hours and hours and hours, and he had accommodations that were helping him, but it just became so overwhelming. And I remember having to just really have a conversation with myself. It was almost like just a realization moment where I had to think, who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for me to make him stay and fight? And is this really teaching him his independent skills for me to have to do so much? It was really becoming more of 60% mom helping him through at that point, because the complexity had gotten so much. So at that point, we did have to go back to have an IEP meeting. He was hit or miss on his standardized tests. Some years he passed, some years he didn't. Again, that whole recall long-term was really a challenge. And we ended up determining that we were going to consider modifying his curriculum. It was for me as a teacher mom, I felt like I'd spent all these years and it was me that had the issue, really not him. He graduated, has a diploma, went off to community college, has done great, but it was really, really hard for me. The one thing I want to say about the accommodations that I think is really important for committees, and it also ties into goals, is that more does not mean better. Quantity is not necessarily equating to quality. And when we came to that freshman realization, I really had to think of what he truly needed. We started in elementary, 5th grade was his first IEP, and that just kind of added accommodations. And you see that where they just keep stacking and stacking and stacking, and he ended up with 30 by the end of 8th grade. And at that point, his freshman year, I realized I have to start teaching him at that high school level how to be independent and how to access his own accommodations. So I really then started stripping away the unnecessary accommodations. And that's not always a conversation that a lot of families want. Families want to add more and more and more. But truly, when they leave high school and they go into that community college or wherever they may go, or in this case now, he's working at a grocery store here in town, they have to learn to self-advocate, ask for what they need. And so we really kind of came full circle in that part of his schooling, where I had to pull back as mom and as teacher mom, and I had to really strip down to the essentials of truly what he needed and not just keep stacking more and more on that. So those questions that were about high school concepts, really a lot of that is due to probably long-term retrieval issues where they're not able to recall things that were learned. So that question was about why are they showing demonstration in one day and they're not? I used to call it like the lights were on some days they weren't, because the connections were not always wired. And so we would have to do a lot of pre-learning before the learning to kind of recall, bring that information to the front of the brain so that he could then attach the new information onto the information that he had already learned. And then those repetitions are always helpful. And when it comes to standardized testing, it's a challenge. That's all I'm going to say. Is if that long-term retrieval is demonstrated as a deficit for a student, then that is always going to be a problem in terms of standardized assessment. So there's no magic pill for that one. It's just do the best we can. So there's a long description there, but I hope to touch on Samantha and Jennifer's questions about kind of those higher processes and going on to post-secondary.
No, that was very helpful. Thank you so much for going through that. And I think that's a really nice segue to come back to Heather to talk a little bit about when to push and when to back off, right? Because that's that's what we're dealing with a lot, because some days are great days and some days aren't. And so can you talk about that in an educational setting, and just generally, how do you deal with low frustration tolerance, which we also see with our DCC students?
Yeah, low frustration tolerance, I feel, is like very, very common with our DCCers. So first, real quick background, low frustration tolerance is just the person's ability to cope with a difficult person or a difficult situation. I see it often presented in like, they're more willing to quit, not willing. They are going to quit anything that is they see as frustrating or too hard. They're going to only focus on the negatives. You could have the best day in the world as a family, but if your kid tripped one time and got a skinned knee, that is all that they are going to focus on, is that skinned knee and how terrible the day was because they skinned their knee. Okay, the day could have been great, but that is part of the low frustration tolerance. We see it a lot when we're doing teaching, that the kids will shut down. So they'll be going along, and then it just they hit their frustration tolerance and turn off. They're not going to hear what you're saying to them. They're not going to move on. They're not going to learn it because you're saying, you know what you're doing. Why aren't you doing it? Right? That's not going to make them learn it or get it done. They are frustrated. And so the best way that we deal with that is a complete subject change or a location change, which I know is harder in the public schools, but anything to shift their mind focus. So they have been focusing on this math page for way too long, probably, and that's why they're frustrated on it. So you move over and you're like, well, let's go do a walk around the school, or let's, go out and do some jumping jacks or something like that. Anything to switch their brain. If you can switch subjects, that's even better. And then come back to it, because they're gonna do it and they know how to do whatever the assignment is, but they have to be in the right mindset. We have days where Timmy hits his frustration tolerance, and I'm like, okay, we're just going to do it tomorrow. Like, again, homeschool setting is a little bit different and a little easier. But I can say, okay, math is just not working today. Okay, we're just going to push math to the side. We'll pick this up tomorrow. Let's do something different. And then he's good. As long as he knows he does not have to stay on that one activity. When I talked to him actually about low frustration tolerance one day as I was prepping for this, his words were, his brain does not work even though he wants it to. That's exactly how he described it. I'm like, that's the perfect description. Like, you want your brain to work and it's not doing what you want it to do, and you're getting frustrated. But yeah, once they get out of, we call it a shutdown. We call it, when Timmy goes through this, he's just shutting down, nothing's gonna work. But once they get out that shutdown, if you can swap their focus, they're ready to learn again. They're ready to work. They're ready to be pleasant individuals. When Timmy hits his, he hits himself in the head a lot when he gets frustrated, or it will come out in yelling and tears, and we hit the whole gamut of anger, sadness type emotions. But yeah, just any way you can shift their focus, redirect them as much as possible. We would have to tell people to do this even as a baby. So he's 10 now, but even when he was 1 or 2, we would take him to church and, drop him off in the nursery, and we let them know, if he starts crying, you need to redirect him. And very few churches that we found actually listened to us, but the ones that didn't got thrown up on because he would cry till he puked when he was that age. The ones who listened, he had a great time, but we would always tell people, like, when he gets this upset, bad things are going to happen. You need to redirect. So little kids all the way through, redirection is key for that low frustration tolerance.
Very helpful. Okay, guys, we're coming towards the end. We just have 2 questions left. And so if you have anything, any burning questions, put them in the chat. I'll do like an open question answering for any of the panelists at the very end. Kathe, let's talk about what you call the quirkiness of people with DCC. And I love that you call it a quirk. Makes it so relatable.
Yes.
Can you talk about how that quirkiness presents and what educators can do to assist DCC students in those situations?
Yes. So quirkiness, I feel like, encompasses a broad range of behavior. that DCCer can have anything from, they're overly excited about something to they're tantruming about something. You're like, why the heck are they doing that? For a DCCer with quirkiness, I feel like that could be described as the inability to see what situation is going on. This is kind of one of my favorite things to talk about with DCCers, because our quirkiness comes from a lot of misunderstanding situations. And misjudging what's going on, just not getting it. When the misunderstanding arises, those behaviors can come out as tantrums, lack of focus, anger, agitated, worried, like I talked about earlier, the friendship situations. You think somebody's mad at you, but they're not. Maybe they're just tired. With DCC, it's very rigid. So there's difficulty adapting. Whereas a typical person, it's like that rubber band theory where, everybody's a rubber band and you have this core way the rubber band sits, but then typical people can adapt and expand their rubber band depending on the situations that they come in contact with. But then at the end of the day, they can go back to who they were. The quirkiness with us, with DCCers, is that we don't like to push that rubber band past any of its stretchy point. And when teachers see that these behaviors are arising, I think those are the perfect moments for what I've told Lillian's teachers in the past is they're teachable moments. Because a lot of times with the misunderstanding, they don't realize that they're in the wrong. And it's not like they've done something bad. It could just be like, for the situation, their response to it looks weird to everybody else, but not them, because they took that situation as one thing and everybody else knew it was this other way. So instead of, going at them and saying, okay, you're going to go to the principal, you can't do this, you're being really bad. It's more of a moment to pull them aside and say, what did you think was happening in that situation? Because our quirkiness comes from our lack of being able to understand people's tone of voice and their facial expressions. My biggest fun example that my husband loves that I use is just a couple of years ago. We practice this all the time. A couple of years ago, he was coming home from work every day, and he and I wouldn't see each other all day long. He'd do his work, I'd do my mom stuff, and he would come home and I'd instantly be like, are you okay? Why are you mad at me? What did I do? How can I fix this? And I would just get after him. And then I'm worrying and I'm thinking, well, I haven't even been around him all day. What did I do? And finally, I had to open up to him and say, when you come home, what does this face mean? And he said, this is my tired face. This is not my mad face. So we misunderstand things, and then situations can trickle almost out of hand with these quirky behaviors that we end up having going on. When I was younger, my brother used to pick on me at the dining room table. I didn't know he was being sarcastic. I know now as an adult, he's a very sarcastic person. I thought he was being mean to me. So I would storm away from the dining room table every night, close myself behind my bedroom door, and I'd sit in there wondering, why is no one coming to talk to me? Why is no one coming to see if I'm okay? It took me until my daughter was born to realize, oh my gosh, I was misunderstanding that the whole time. That's why no one came to me. I was the one that was acting weird in that situation. And Lillian now is as an elementary school student, just the last couple of years, this is a big thing that we've been working on too, because she will misunderstand something that her older sibling has said, and she'll do the same thing, storm up to her room, start crying. And instead of letting it go like my family used to do, because we didn't know about my disorder until I was 19, I go right up to her and we break it down and I say, what did you think happened? Let's talk about this. This is what really happened. You misunderstood it, and here's how we're going to fix it for next time. So we use it as a big teaching moment with all the quirks. So I don't know if that helped answer anything.
No, it does.
I don't know if Barb
yeah.
wants to jump in. I know Barb and I usually talk about the tone of voice and facial expression stuff together. So Barb, if you have more to add with the quirks, and if you need to talk about me, it's okay. Because I know you do sometimes.
I always apologize to Kathe first before I talk about hers. No, I mean, I totally agree. And you know, and it's okay. I think I would encourage having those conversations with your kids too, and your adults, like, because you want to make sure everybody's okay, right? And I know sometimes Kathe will be in a meeting and she'll call me later and she'll be like, did I understand that correctly, right? And I think some of it's teaching them to be self-aware too, is really important. I feel like those that are very adapted is because they are they're very self-aware of like asking those questions and having like security in a person or people that they can trust to ask those questions to is really, really important, especially in school. Like they need someone that they can trust at all times.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, last question from me, and then I'll let you guys share any final words that you have. But last question for Heather, because we all are homeschool parents, right, in one way or another, because these students are with us in the evenings and they can't help but to learn. But do you have any advice or things that you think that homeschool families need to know and do when working with their DCC students to support their educational success?
Oh yes, I mean I could talk about homeschooling for hours. But
We'll have
real
to do
quick,
a
I
whole
want to jump
nother
back to a
podcast
question
on
in the chat.
that.
Timmy is 10, and we ended up pulling him from public school mostly because of his sensory issues related to his DCC. He has complete agenesis of agenesis of the corpus callosum, and he basically came to us and said, I don't like how my body feels. He would hide after school every day for an hour before we could talk to him, touch him, anything, because he just needed to get his body regulated. So that's the reason why we pulled him. And he really did come to us and say, please let me stay home. This is not good for me. And so we, made a very tough decision because we were really hoping to launch him out and be good, but we ended up pulling him back. As far as homeschooling, the huge benefit is that you get to go at their own pace. They don't have to keep up with a classroom of kids. They don't have to feel like they're behind or going slow. They're going at their own pace, and their pace is perfect. Also, like I know a lot of people will like look at homeschoolers like, oh, they're way behind what public schools do, right? That's a very common, I call it a misconception, but homeschooling really starts with learning how to think. So we might not do all the same history, events and all of that covered in the year that the public school does, but my kids are learning how to think and they're learning how to learn. And so when we get to the point where they're a little bit older, I mean, how much do you remember from second grade social studies, right? Not a whole lot. But when you get into the older grades and you're reading really well and comprehending, you can actually grab books from the library and learn about a topic from actual text and things like that. So that's more of what we focus on. And then it's so nice because you can skip those days when you have the low frustration. You can take time to review concepts and master concepts, and it's okay if they forget. You can come back to them again because it is a lot of one-on-one time. Even with my 3 kids, we have a small group time in the morning that we do together, and the rest of the day is individual one-on-one work with them. So there's just a lot. It's okay to skip subjects. It's okay to be patient. It's okay if it feels like you're failing for the first year, because I've read it takes 3 years to get into the homeschool routine. We are on year 4 right now, and things are going wonderfully. My kids are totally in the groove. All their work is getting done. They're progressing really well. It's really fun. Plus, you get all the extra time with your kids, which I know sometimes when you're used to sending them to school, you're like, oh my gosh, no, right? But once you have them home, like I was like, I miss them when they're gone during the day. Like I love having them around me all the time. So it's fun stuff like that. And then real
Oh,
quick, I saw a
awesome.
question about other examples for heavy work, and I just wanted to throw in like jumping, crawling, anything where you're on a hard surface, or doing something with your whole body weight. So
Awesome. Well, ladies, thank you so much for all of the incredible information you shared on the panel today. Thank you for staying late and keeping this going for people. We'll have to segment the questions so people can jump to what they need to see as they're going through this as well. But any parting words, anything that you're like, oh, I really wanted to say this before we drop off? No need, because we've been on here for a while.
I did see a question about headaches that I wanted to talk about real quick, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Only because I'm going through this with Lillian right now. And it was a big struggle for me through high school when I noticed it. And then it took up until dating my husband for me to start getting less and less headaches, because I think a lot of DCCers' headaches stem from that worry and the anxiety of the whole social situation of friendships and doing things correctly. And I know for me, my headaches became less one day when my husband said, it's okay to say no to people. Because I felt like anyone asked me to do something or help someone or be here for this event or that event, I had to say yes to all of it. And he was like, you realize they say no to you sometimes, and it's okay. Like, you're okay with that because you understand it's also okay for you to say no. And since then, I've had like 90% less headaches. But Lillian is starting to go through that. Yeah, exactly. Lillian is starting to go through that. So we started actually working with the social worker at her school. We did get glasses. I saw someone responded in the comments of, have you tried glasses? We did that too. We moved to the front of the room. The headaches, sometimes they're specific things. She anticipates gym and isn't a fan of that. So I think that starts to bring up worry and gives her headaches. She always has headaches by the end of it. And so we've started working with the school social worker. She goes there once a week to be able to talk about social situations that she's encountered through the week, to talk through how could she have done it differently, or what can she do next time when this arises, or when she puts herself in that situation, so that the worry hopefully becomes less. And then there's the other route of things we're also doing. We went to the pediatrician and got a note saying we could keep ibuprofen at the school. So the nurse helps us to try to cut the headache so that by the end of the day, like the person in the comment says, it's brain fatigue. And then even the teacher notices it. She's struggling. She's wanting to go to the nurse and this and that. And so we're trying to lessen that worry and make her aware. She and I talk about it. Maybe you're worrying too much about this friend. It's okay to not worry about them and let them fail on their own. It's not your job. So that might be one of the big things with the headaches.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking on that question too. Well, ladies, it has been such a pleasure. Everyone, this will be posted on our YouTube page along with all of the other webinars that we've done as part of the Connect and Reflect series. But again, a huge thank you to our panelists and to Kathe in particular for coming up with this wonderful idea that's been so well received by everyone. So thank you again. I hope everyone has a great evening. Good night.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for coming on.
Goodbye.